Hello students. So in this session I shall tell you about the social contract theory of Rousseau. So we've already studied about social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So let us now just have a look as to what Rousseau have to say about the state of nature. So according to Rousseau, the state of nature was an era of idyllic felicity. So felicity means, you can call it as a happiness. And he further says that reason did not guide the action of individuals who were moved by their emotions. And every individual in the state of nature had unlimited liberty, and there was absence of private property, no competition, and there was no jealousy, and the people lived the free life of a savage. And further, Rousseau says that man in the state of nature was not aware about the concept of right and wrong, and he was also away from the notions of what we call it as virtue and vice. So further, Rousseau says that with the passage of time, things change in the state of nature. So which means that the optimistic picture, or the what Rousseau tells us about the state of nature, that men were equal, they were self-sufficient, they were happy or contented, and man was compassionate and considerate. All these, he says that with the passage of time, it gradually changed, and he gives several reasons for these changes in the state of nature. According to Rousseau, the rise in population is one of the most important reason why there was change in the state of nature. And in addition to this, he also says that the dawn of reason was also a reason, dawn of reason as one of the cause for the change in the state of nature. He further says that simplicity and happiness which were prevalent in the state of nature slowly gradually disappeared, and all this resulted in the entering of a social contract, where Rousseau says that all the problems that persisted in the state of nature, that is the changes that took place after a passage of time, all these problems were solved because of because the people entered into a social contract. And now let us see what this contract is about. So under this contract, Rousseau says that everyone surrendered to the community all his rights. So now what we have studied, under Thomas Hobbes and under John Locke social contract theory, that let us take an example of John Locke. He says that people did not surrender all the rights, but a few rights they surrendered just because they wanted the sovereign to protect themselves, or so this is how what John Locke says. But here Rousseau says that under this contract everyone surrendered to the community all his rights. So whereas Hobbes and Locke they talk about their rights being surrendered to sovereign or a king, here Rousseau talks about that that everyone surrenders to the community all rights, that is the individual surrender their rights to the community, and as a result of which the community becomes the sovereign. So all the individuals individually surrender their rights to the community, and so therefore what Locke talks about and what Hobbes talks about sovereign to be a king or a monarch, Rousseau on the other hand talks about sovereign to be the community. So further Rousseau says that the individual remained free as before. So as he was in the state of nature, he was free, he was a noble savage, what he calls it as a primitive man. As he says, he remained free as he was before. And further he says that and under this contract law was the expression of the general will. So law was the expression of the general will in the sense which he talks about where an individual surrenders all his rights to the community, and that community becomes the sovereign. So whatever the sovereign or the community says that had the effect of law, and that the sovereignty could not be alienated or divided. And further he says that the government was not a party to the contract. So there is a lot of difference, between what Hobbes says, what John Locke says, and what Rousseau says. So now let us, see about the concept of general will. So this concept of general will, is given by Rousseau. Obviously, when we are talking about J.J. Rousseau here, who has given the social contract theory. So just few minutes ago, I just mentioned to you that, all the individuals surrender their rights to the community, and the community becomes the sovereign. So the general will, this is the gist of Rousseau's political system. So Rousseau here, general will in the sense, it is the will of the people. And to make it more clear, Rousseau makes a distinction between the real will and the actual will. So here the general will, you can call it as the will of the community, to whom the individual surrenders his rights. So now coming back to the difference between the actual will and the actual will and the real will. According to Rousseau, the actual will is the will of the individual, and this will, he says that this actual will makes an individual egoistic and prevents him from thinking about the common good. Whereas he says real will, on the other hand, aims at common good, and it is pure and perfect, and it always results in general welfare. So here, Rousseau makes distinction between, and he talks about the general will, he explains the concept of general will, and in that he differentiates between what is actual will and the real will. So what we have understood by this actual will is associated with the will of the individual, and real will is, associated with the common good, that is, which he calls it as pure and perfect. Further, Rousseau says that general will is the will of all the citizens. So I told you initially that, the individual surrender their rights to the community, and the community becomes the sovereign. So therefore, and that sovereign, you call it as the general will, and that will is the will of all citizens. So will of all citizens means all the individuals, on their own surrender their rights to the sovereign, and that sovereign, you call it as community, and that is again the general will. So he says that, the general will is the will of all the citizens, wherein, the citizens are not concerned about their interests, but they are concerned about the interest of all. So general will in the sense, it is the will of all the individuals, it is the will of all the people, it is the will of all the citizens who are there. And so therefore this will is not concerned about the individual interest, or it is not concerned about the interest of a single individual, but it is concerned about the interest of the all. Further, Rousseau says that it is the voice of all for the good of all. So it is the voice of all for the good of all, in the sense, all the people, it is the voice of all the people, and it is for the good of all. It is for the good of all the people, and it is for the good of all the individuals, and it is for the good of all the citizens. And he says that this general will represents the common conscience of the common good, that is after proper discussion and deliberations. And not only this, he further says that the will of each individual, is merged into the general will, which corresponds to the common interests of all the members. So now it is here crystal clear what is the meaning of general will. So the will of each individual is merged into the general will. So it is a sum total of the will of all the individuals, you call it as general will. So further, Rousseau says that, general will is permanent, and that, it stands for the welfare of all, and that there can be no justifications, of disobeying it. The individual cannot give any justifications, any reason or any cause, for which he is not going to obey the general will. So therefore, because it is permanent and it stands for the welfare of all, and that will which stands for the welfare of all, obviously it is, for the common good, and that, nobody can disobey such kind of a will. And further he says that, whenever an individual will is in conflict with the general will shall prevail. So obviously, at the cost of the individual will, the will of the common good cannot be sacrificed. So whenever there is a conflict between between an individual will and the general will shall prevail. So because Rousseau says that individual will is the selfish will, and whereas on the other hand the general will is not the selfish will, because it stands for the common interest, it stands for the welfare of all. Then further Rousseau says that the general will is sovereign. The general will is sovereign, and it must be obeyed and followed by all. As I just told you a few minutes ago that no justifications cannot, justifications cannot be made by any individual, to for that he is going to disobey it. And further he says that the general will is not followed by any individual. Suppose any individual, any person is he says that he is not going to follow and the general will. Rousseau says that individual can be coerced to follow and obey the same. That is that individual will be forced, he will be pressurized, he will be coerced to follow the general will if he is reluctant to follow the general will. So here now who is the coercing authority, that is who is going to force the individual to obey the general will? Rousseau says here the coercive authority, or the authority which pressurizes or coerces or forces the individual to obey the general will, is none other than the general will itself. So the general will itself, the community, the entire community, which Rousseau calls it as a sovereign, is going to force the individual to obey the general will in his interest. And further Rousseau says that general will is inalienable and it is indivisible. It means that it cannot be represented in any legislature. The general will cannot be delegated to anybody. So it cannot be separated. So further it cannot be separated. Rousseau stood for democracy, direct democracy and popular sovereignty. When we talk about this concept of sovereignty, Rousseau stood for popular sovereignty. So popular sovereignty means that sovereignty lies in the hands of the people, or sovereignty lies in the people. So he was of the view that as long as the general will is sovereign, the form of government doesn't make any difference. Whatever government may be doesn't make any difference. And he further says that the law in the state is the expression of the general will, and law making is the task of the sovereign general will. That is it is the sovereign general will, or it is the community at large, community as a whole, that makes the laws. But he says that the enforcement of law is the function of the executive will. So executive will, and that is the executive will is the agent of the general will. So here executive will is referred to the government, and government is the agent of the general will. That is the agent of the general will in the sense the agent of the people, and the government is subordinate to the people. So here Rousseau says that the individual has a dual role to play, one as that of a lawmaker and the other as that of a law respecter. So which means that on the one side it is the community or the sovereign that makes the laws, and which you call it, and which we call it, and which Rousseau calls it as a general will. And on the other hand, it is again all the individuals need to obey or respect whatever the laws are put forward by the community. So now let us quickly evaluate the social contract theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, J.J. Rousseau. So the concept of popular sovereignty, which I told you just few minutes ago, that's popular sovereignty means sovereignty lies in the people. And this concept of popular sovereignty, which is given by Rousseau, it is said that it has brought about revolution in political philosophy. And why it is very significant to mention here is because it is said that 11 years after Rousseau's death, the French Revolution broke out, and Napoleon regarded Rousseau as the motivating force behind the French Revolution. So once Napoleon said that if Rousseau had not been there, the French Revolution would not have been broken out. So political science, further, political science is indebted to Rousseau for, he said that will and not force is the creator of state. And another point of appreciation of Rousseau's theory is that law is the expression of general will. And finally, Rousseau's theory upholds democracy, and Rousseau became one of the champion of democracy and people's rights. So, as far as defects or demerits in Rousseau's social contract theory is concerned, his theory is criticized as being imaginary because of his idea of man being a noble savage in the state of nature. You can call it as imaginary, or you can call it as an utopian as well. And his concept of general will is considered to be vague or ambiguous due to the distinction that he has made between the general will and the will of all. And along with this, Rousseau has delegated, according to critics, absolute power or unlimited power to the general will. And the critics feel that law is not the expression of general will, as in the contemporary times. It is the will of the majority party in the legislature that prevails, and it is not the will of the all. So this is about the social contract theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Thank you.